Order. I call Mohammed Yassin to move the motion.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve with your chairmanship, Mr. Vickers. I beg to move that this House is considered impact of universities, finance and jobs in higher education. The UK's higher education sector is facing a severe financial crisis with profound implications for both staff and students. 2 years ago, university lecturers across the UK raised an urgent call for help when they voted to strike. Regrettably, their concerns were largely ignored. Over 5,000 jobs cuts have already been announced, with projections indicating more than 10,000 jobs will be lost across the sector this year. The Office for Students' latest modelling suggests that nearly three-quarters of English higher education providers could be in deficit by 25-26. The University of Bedfordshire, in my constituency, has recently announced plans to cut over 200 jobs as part of its efforts to address financial challenges. Several factors contribute to this, including tuition fees that fail to cover actual costs, rising operational expenses, and a significant decline in international student numbers from 5,270 in 2023 to just over 2,000 in 2025. The funding model, which depends on international students paying higher fees, has harmed universities since Brexit, as has the Conservative government's policy to crack down on student visas, despite international students contributing over 40 billion to the economy before the restrictions were introduced. The amount of income English universities receive for teaching home students has declined in real terms almost every year since 2015-16 and is now approaching its lowest level since 1997. I'll give you this point.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving way and congratulate him on this debate, securing this debate today. A 2024 report from PwC previously said that 10 of Scotland's 15 universities were at risk of falling into financial deficit by 2027. That is now looking like the 18 institutions that students can study in. 7 of them have a deficit now. So there's a particularly acute issue in Scotland. But does he agree with me that falling government investment is part of the issue? And indeed in Scotland, we believe that it's 22% lower than it was in 2013-14.
I thank the honourable member for her intervention. I'll come to that point. I'll mention Universities of Scotland in my speech in a minute. So even prior to the 2022 reforms, the UK had the lowest share of public funding in tertiary education among OECD member countries, with the majority of the funding coming from fees and student loans. The tuition fee system is unpopular with both students and universities. While reversing it may be unrealistic, the model has to be improved. A disturbing pattern of job cuts is emerging, with universities following suit at an alarming rate, even those who are running a surplus. Critical administrative and technical staff key to the smooth running of courses and the welfare of students are often the first to be let go. We are witnessing widespread deficits, restructuring, fire and rehire tactics, and even the closure of entire departments, with faculties, schools, and jobs being lost or downgraded. A survey of institutions in spring 2024 found almost 40% had seen voluntary redundancies, almost 30% had reduced module choices for students, and almost a quarter had closed courses. In just the past month, universities in Dundee, Coventry and Bradford have announced similar measures. Perhaps most shockingly, Kingston University has proposed the closure of its humanities department. The closure of the humanities department in a country renowned for its literary and cultural heritage, Shakespeare's birthplace, no less signal a troubling future for our higher education system. This is not merely a loss for humanities, it is loss for the future of education in our nation and a blow to our global reputation as leaders in education. These subjects are disproportionately impacted by these cuts and reinforces the damaging notion that studying arts subjects are the privilege of a select few, a hugely digressive step. Under the previous Conservative government, a false narrative emerged, claiming that arts cannot equip students to thrive in a rapidly evolving world. In reality, these disciplines are adopted to a skill-based agenda, producing exceptional communicators, critical thinkers, and researchers, still essential for a healthy democracy and an increasingly AI-driven world. The English higher education sector contributes £95 billion to the economy, while our vibrant creative industries generate £125 billion in gross value added to the UK economy each year. Last year, Labour unveiled our exciting plans for arts, culture, and creative industries as key sectors for driving economic growth. But none of this can be achieved without investing in the teachers and lecturers who train the next generation of skilled professionals. Post-92 universities, which often serve the most diverse student demographics, are hit hardest. Many students in these institutions are the first in their families to attend universities and come from lower socio-economic background. These universities are essential for students who cannot afford to live away from home. But the problem isn't confined to the arts and humanities or post-92 universities. Newcastle University, whose Chancellor is the chair of the prestigious Russell Group, has announced plans to cut 300 full-time positions, including 65 academic roles. Cardiff University also plans to cut 400 academic staff, almost 10% of its total, and eliminate subjects like music, modern languages, and nursing, despite ongoing NHS workforce shortages. Edinburgh's £140 million deficit forecast over 18 months outstrips the £30 million deficit recorded by Cardiff University. Durham University has joined the ranks of Russell Group institutions planning job cuts, with the target of reducing staff costs by £20 million over 2 years, starting with 200 professional services staff this year. For a full view of the scale of the cuts, visit the UK HE shrinking page compiled by the Queen's Mary University of London and UCU, which tracks redundancies, restructures, and closure across the sector. I'll give you at this point. Thank you.
Before he moves on for the list, and just to save people going onto the website, can I mention Brunel University as well, where I've been on the picket lines with UCU, and there's large numbers of job cuts being threatened. This is a successful university doing everything asked of it of government to provide the skills training for the future itself. What is extremely disappointing to me is the refusal of management to even engage with the union to look at transitional arrangements and future planning. There must be a way in which we can work our way through this after years of austerity. Government working with universities' managements and with the unions themselves to see our way through.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his comments, so I must make some progress now. Universities are major employers and significant contributors to local and national economies. A recent report on Lancaster University's economic and social impact, for instance, found it contributed £2 billion to the UK economy in 2021-22, with 61% of the impact felt in North West. If we continue to cut essential departments, English, nursing, modern foreign languages, where will our teachers and professionals will come from? The approach is also so short-sighted. Without a strong university sector, how can the Chancellor grow the economy? Universities are central to delivering education, research and innovation in critical areas for future growth, including STEM fields. Degree-level apprenticeships are another important part of the government's strategy to address the skills shortages and rebalance the economy. By combining academic study with practical work experience, Apprenticeships offer a valuable alternative to academic degrees, but when universities shrink, the skill gap will only widen. In the blink of an eye, we are losing thousands of years' worth of accumulated knowledge. University exists to pass expertise to the next generation. There is a moral imperative to protect it. I urge the government to review university governance and ask why expensive building programs are being prioritized over investment in staff and students. Multi-year commitments on research and higher education funding are expected in June, when the government's spending review is finalized. The reduction in faculty options, loss of vital services, and pressure on remaining staff all contribute to a diminished quality of education. This is not the future we should offer our students. We have to fix the broken funding model, safeguard staff, enhance the student experience, and ensure our universities continue to be engines of economic growth and innovation.
The honourable member.
I'll give way at this point.
I'd like to thank the member for Bedford, and he's making some very powerful points that money should be put to staff and students. I'm the Member of Parliament for Dundee, and Dundee University is facing really critical challenges just now, with almost 700 jobs at risk, and my thoughts are with them. I'd like to thank the Scottish Government for the £22 million package to support them. However, I wanted to ask the member if he agreed with me on whether or not the UK Government now needs to reverse the Tory policy, which was a hostile environment for international students, so they couldn't bring members of the family, because it's cost our university alone over £12 million. And would he also further agree that perhaps the national insurance contributions, which is an additional £3 million that my University of Dundee has to find, needs to be stopped and stopped right now? Thank you.
Thank the honourable member for his intervention, and this is what I'm asking the government to look into this whole scenario very carefully, because it is impacting staff and the students and our future generations. The future of higher education in the UK is at a crossroads. We have a choice: continue down this path of a boom and bust approach, cutting jobs and course offering, or make the necessary investment to secure our universities as pillars of innovation, growth and opportunity. I urge the government to take immediate action to address the crisis, consider a sustainable funding model, look at capping the numbers for a fairer distribution of students, and look again at students' visas to save our universities, and ensure higher education remains a vibrant and accessible resource for future generations. Thank you. Thank you.
I remind members that they should bob, as indeed they are doing, if they wish to be called in the debate. It's clearly going to be necessary to impose a time limit. So we'll start off with a 4-minute limit, and Jim Shannon will show us how to go about it. The question is that this House has considered the impact of university finances on jobs in higher education. Jim Shannon.
Mr. Chairman, you're very kind to give me the challenge of 4 minutes. It'll be probably an 8-minute speech in 4 minutes. Can I first of all thank the honourable member for Bedford for setting the scene so very well, with lots of detail, lots of information, and I wish to give a Northern Ireland perspective on the studies we put forward. We witness hundreds of students going to different areas in the UK to study. There is no doubt that the financial stability of our higher education facilities is important, so it's vital that we're here to discuss that. Mr. Chairman, like many things, Northern Ireland has a different set of guidelines in terms of higher education. Our approach is distinctive, as we use oversight from a government department, the Department of the Economy. In 2012-2013 financial year, the combined income of higher education institutions in Northern Ireland was approximately £502.9 million. Fast forward to 2023, Queen's University, Northern Ireland's primary education facility, reports a total income of £472.2 million. I also have to put in record as well my thanks to the Queen's University and Ulster University as well for the partnerships that they have in trying to find some of the cures for some of the great diseases and problems we have, whether it be heart disease, diabetes, cancer, cardiac arrest as well, but that's also part of your heart one, but also those with with eyesight issues as well. Furthermore, there are growing concerns about the higher education sector's reliance on international tuition fees. The House of Commons Public Accounts Committee has warned that higher education providers are potentially exposing themselves to significant financial risks if future growth in international student numbers is not as high as they expect or as high as they had hoped. Ulster University back home in Northern Ireland, for example, did experience increases in income, with tuition fees from international students rising by more than 50% in the 21-22 financial year and reaching some £12 million. Whilst it is understood, Mr Chairman, that we cater and are generous to welcoming international students, as I think we should be, upon speaking with many students in my own constituency, it became clear that many are put off going to England, Scotland and even Northern Ireland for university placements due to the intense tuition costs. Yes, universities rely on these fees to be able to deliver fantastic programmes across the board for lots of people and to train our young ones and our students for the future to get them the jobs that they can then do and help this economy to grow. But it's no secret that the levels of tuition fees are extortionate. That will have to be paid back. In addition to this, as we said, that 1 in 5, and this is a worrying statement by the way, 1 in 5 graduates and around 70,000 students a year would have been financially better off if they didn't go to university. That's a worrying fact. It tells me that many students will actually say, well, look, am I going to university or will I just get a job somewhere and not have a debt to pay back sometime in the future? But it is worrying. It is a statistic we can't ignore, and I would seek the Minister's thoughts on that and how we can address that for all of us. Mr Chairman, there is a parallel between supporting students and supporting our wonderful universities. There's always a balance to be got. We need to have that in the right way. It's partnerships that universities can use with business in relation to trying to find some of the cures to diseases in the world, which Queen's University does, Ulster University does, and others do across this great United Kingdom. If we allow our universities to financially suffer, they will face challenges such as reduced funding for academic programmes with limited grants and diminished support. So important whilst we encourage students to attend universities, and we should and we must, and pursue their dreams, which we want to encourage, the facilities must be financially supported to allow this to happen. So I look forward to hearing from the Minister. And as a request, if I can, Minister, you'll never have made a debate, well, don't ask for something, but ask for something in a very respectful way. That in future that the Minister can engage collectively as a nation, despite having different guidelines, to ensure that universities and jobs are protected and that all our students are supported. Thank you very much.
Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Bridges. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I thank my honourable friend for securing this important debate today. I'd like to draw attention to my declaration of interest. I'm a member of the UCU and a former professor in higher education. As someone who dedicated over 20 years to teaching and research in higher education, I've seen firsthand the transformative power of that work. Students' lives are changed, economies grow, communities are transformed, cities are lifted, all of those things happen. But despite the challenging times we face in that sector, I remain optimistic about the future of our universities and the vital role they play in our society, but we do need to act before it's too late, so I think we need to act sooner rather than later. The current financial model for universities is the most challenging it's been since the last Labour government enabled so many to access higher education. The domestic tuition fee, as you'll know, there was a cap introduced in 2012, only increased slightly in 2017, and again this year it's not kept pace with inflation, and that financial strain is felt across the sector. Research funding is another area of concern. You can't have universities without research. The research informs the teaching. That's the nature of the beast and the game. Research funding is, of course, then another area of concern. The UK prides itself quite rightly as being a global leader in innovation. Our universities are world-class. They attract people from around the globe. But research often runs at a loss. It's often subsidised by education provision. And it's exactly that research, though, that is underpinning our productivity and economic growth. And that will be in any sector you care to name, in AI, in defence, in health, in life sciences, in creative industries. If you took the universities away, where would we get that innovation from? Or certainly accessible innovation that's open to all to be part of. International student recruitment has also been severely affected, as my honourable friend has said, post-Brexit. The University of Essex, where I taught, has seen a 47% decline in EU student enrolments, and recent changes to visa policies have contributed to a 40% drop in international student numbers. That reduction in income exacerbates the financial challenges faced by the sector. Now, despite these difficulties, universities have been very proactive in seeking solutions, and I was personally involved in creating those solutions over many years. At the University of Essex, we introduced efficiency measures, we diversified income streams, we invested in transnational education, we merged departments, we've done an awful lot over the past few years. I can feel myself slipping back into we in a rather odd way there. The university also collaborated with local businesses, and indeed I ran a doctoral training consortium which spanned 10 universities across the southeast of England, and my whole job was to get money in from business to support collaborative masters and PhD programmes. And I do think industry and business needs to step up in this regard. They benefit from universities and those that are educated there, and they also need to step up to assist here, in my view. So the contribution that universities make to economic growth is palpable. I think for every £14 of economic investment, for every pound of public money invested, you get £14 back. So a good economic case to be made there. I'm encouraged that the Education Select Committee has an inquiry on funding in higher education on the 8th of April, and I would really urge the Minister to take seriously the issues that will be raised there, and I would encourage her to meet with those of us who've worked in the sector to explore solutions that would involve the unions and business and all the other stakeholders. Thank you.
Stephen Gethings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's adequate to be following on from the member. I should refer to my register of interest in terms of being Vice Chair of the All-Party Group on Universities, and also in terms of my relationship with the University of St Andrews, and one of which I'm very, very proud of, and the member talks about her own experience. I was previously Assistant Vice Principal at St Andrews with oversight over recruitment, internationalisation, all these areas that are crucial to the health of our sector. But today I want to be closer to home, and I want to talk a little bit about the University of Dundee, and my friend, the member for Dundee Central, has already made reference to this. And I should also register my interest as a graduate of that university, but as like most people locally, one in which the university is very much part of the family. Part of the family with my father being a graduate and my grandmother working as a cleaner at the institution as well. Before I go on to that, I want to make one thing clear, and we don't hear it enough in this place. Our higher education sector thrives and is world-leading in teaching and in research because it's international, because it is competitive and brings in the best researchers and students from all over the world, and will only be competitive if it remains international. But today, at the University of Dundee, the city faces 700 job cuts, devastating for families, devastating for the city, devastating for Scotland and the wider UK. We all benefit from the research that's done, from the teaching that's done there. And the main issue that has been highlighted that dwarfs all the others is that huge drop in international income. As the Acting Vice Principal told the Scottish Parliament recently, Professor O'Neill said, changes in immigration policy and related factors have had a negative impact on our international student recruitment, and pointed to a drop in postgrad taught numbers by 2/3 in the last 2 years. 2/3. And I'll give way on that point to the member.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the points that are being made around the impact on immigration policy, and I really do. The sector does need a policy which supports it to both attract the best staff and best students. But he will know that the challenge been facing the sector in Scotland is long-lasting, and is due to the underfunding of the sector. Student fees have dropped substantially below the level they get in England, and there's been a real cap on places, and that's why universities in Scotland have had to look to overseas so much. So does he share my disappointment that this year universities faced a real terms cut from the Scottish Government?
So I want to give the member the opportunity to intervene, because I'm going to criticise Scottish Labour and talk about some of Scottish Labour's priorities. The difference between English fees and Scottish fees would not even cover the national insurance increase that has been imposed by his government. Wouldn't even cover it. Never mind the international... I think the member said enough. Never mind, and he's damaged, and his government's damaged the sector enough. Never mind the £12 million, which is structural, that the member for Dundee Central has highlighted. This is a sector that has been battered by Brexit and battered by a Tory hostile environment that the Labour government have embraced. And we want to see something which is international. Now, Scottish Labour previously proposed that we should have greater migration policy being devolved. And the First Minister has talked about a tailored visa route for Scotland. Now, that was something that Scottish Labour proposed previously, and I would love to find out if Scottish Labour still propose that, because that is something that could make a real difference to our sector, and something which his party previously campaigned on. But we've seen the biggest drop in terms of that dependence visa, whereas we know the markets are bringing in dependents from all over the world, and his party colleague has already identified this as being an issue, and others have identified this as being an issue, that wiping out dependence visas, when people bring their kids with them when they come to study, which is entirely understandable, will the government rethink that? Now, I understand that the member cannot say that, but I know that the minister will identify it. But I hope the member will agree with me when the minister goes that that dependence visa needs to be looked at. I hope he agrees with me on that one, because the health of the sector depends on it. The UK is hobbling the international competitiveness. I'm pleased that the Scottish Government stepped up for the University of Dundee and made that contribution. I'm pleased it did so. And Labour members called on it to do so, and SNP members called on it to do so. And I was glad that we all had that common approach. But with the damage that's been done at a UK level, we sit in the UK Parliament. It would be nice to hear Scottish Labour stand up for the sector and the damage that their own government is doing. So will the Minister look at the hostile environment? When they look at this, that is key to this sector. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Danny Beales.
Thank you very much, Mr Vickers. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and thank you to my honourable friend for bringing this debate, an important debate and a very timely one based on, as many members are explaining, the issues currently happening in our constituencies with our fantastic higher education institutions. I have the pleasure of representing Brunel University, as my colleague in Hayes and Harlington has mentioned earlier, and many of the students and staff that make up this university community also live in my constituency. Brunel educates 16,000 students a year and contributes £750 million to the UK economy. It's an important employer, it's an important buyer of services, and it's also the centre of much of our community activity. It hosts a range of community sports groups, concerts, conferences, links with local schools, and even, some distant memories and scars on my back, even hosts the election hustings every election, of which I've got some direct experience for positive and negative at Brunel University. And unfortunately, because of many of the issues that members have already raised of long-term funding challenges, and particularly in Brunel's case, a reliance on international students from particular regions of the country who have been affected by visa changes, the funding crisis at our university means that Brunel has been hit extremely hard and is projecting a deficit this year of £32.9 million. Brunel has therefore instituted a scheme of redundancies of 125 academic staff and 239 other staff across the university and professional services. Around 20% of the workforce at Brunel is affected, and a few weeks ago I met UCU staff members from the university in Parliament at their lobby day, and they told me that they dedicated their lives, sometimes 20 plus years, to university, and it is a deep level of concern amongst them and their colleagues about their futures, but also the universities. And it's a deeply disappointing situation for the university to be in. Universities, as has been said, are really central to human capital, to education, to open opportunities, as well as research for our nation and, more globally, facing some of the challenges that we see before us. These cuts are bad for staff and they're bad for students as well, who want the very best possible education. Moreover, I have a concern about the knock-on effects to the local economy in Uxbridge and South Ruislip. Brunel is a very good institution, an incredibly important part of my community, but as we face up to the missions around recruiting more medical staff through its medical college recently opened, or supporting those not in education, employment and training into training and work, I think Brunel stands at the centre of our community to meet some of those longer-term challenges this government wants to face. And I hope moving forward, therefore, we can look at a more sustainable long-term funding solution for higher education that will stabilise both Brunel and the broader sector's finances. And more immediately, I hope the government will consider how relatively small amounts of transition funding, whether through grant or loans, might be made available to institutions such as Brunel. These institutions, newer universities, don't have very large reserves, don't have historic estates or trusts on which to draw to change the institution at pace. And without those small amounts, relatively small amounts of funding, cuts bite harder. They have to make more redundancies than might need to be the case. So I hope the government can perhaps look and explore those options for universities such as Brunel. And I hope through these measures, through long-term funding settlements, that we can secure Brunel's future and ensure that it can continue to provide the best quality of teaching and continue to be the best possible institution for students, staff and for the broader community in Uxbridge and South Ruislip. Thank you.
Ben Lake.
Because it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and may I begin by congratulating the honourable member for Bedford for securing this very important debate. As we've already heard, Mr Vickers, a great number of higher education institutions across the United Kingdom are facing very worrying times indeed, and I'm sure that we'll hear of other examples from other members as they rise to speak. But I think many who are more learned than I, in this area, will say that this is a situation that has been developing for quite some time. There can be no doubt that what we are now finding, where there's scarcely a week goes by without yet another announcement of significant job cuts at a university at some point in the UK, that this is now a very unsustainable position. And if we don't act, and especially the government intervenes to take grip of the situation, we do face the collapse of a great number of higher education institutions. And it should worry us all because, as it's already been alluded to, universities, as well as the incredible research and teaching that they provide, make such an important contribution to the economy of the United Kingdom. And I'd like just to very briefly talk about the impact and the contribution of higher education in Wales. It supports over 60,000 jobs in the country, contributed over 4.2% of Welsh GDP, and an overall economic impact of nearly £11 billion. Now, the new government has identified growth as a key mission for its administration, and in terms of growth, research and development will be key. And in Wales, just as in other parts of the UK, Welsh universities are critical to ensure that research and innovation can benefit not just communities but also the economy, amounting to 37% of all Welsh research and development expenditure. And in my own constituency of Ceredigion Preseli, I know that first-hand from the good work of the Arbor Innovation Centre associated with Aberystwyth University. But further than that as well, universities help ensure that we have the skills needed for a prosperous society and economy. It's been estimated by a report by Universities UK that more than 400,000 extra graduates will be needed in Wales by 2035 in order to respond to the skill gaps and workforce challenges of the future. Now, that's clearly a problem if we then have a situation in Wales where institution after institution is announcing severe reductions to teaching provision and staff cuts. And as part of that as well, we should also bear in mind that universities are crucial in order of training the workforce for key public services, whether that be in education or health in particular. Now, the other thing I would like to say and emphasise from my own personal experience, and not just as an MP, but also as a person who was born and raised in the university town, the town of Lampeter in Wales, the birthplace of higher education in Wales. We are now facing a very uncertain future, where the university has announced its decision to relocate undergraduate teaching from the campus, from the town, over 200 years of history going down the pan. But the point I make here is that the university also sustains a whole load of extracurricular, if you like, community benefits, from the arts hall to the sports facilities. We make the point very often that universities are important for the economy, and they are. That's where I had my first job. Perhaps I should declare an interest, Mr Vickers. But it's also where, as a young student at sixth form, I was able to benefit from the resources of the library, from the extracurricular courses that the university provided to enrich my own teaching, my learning, and to prepare myself for university. It's where many of my sports teams trained during the winter months in their sports hall. And it also plays host to two of the big events in the town. That is the St David's Day March and the annual Food Festival. All of this is now in jeopardy, and so when we consider the importance of higher education providers, let us also remember not just the economic impact, but also the wider social and community impact that they all have.
Donald.
Thank you very much, Mr Vickers, and it's an honour to serve under your chairship, and I thank the Honourable Member for Bedford for securing this debate. As we've heard, there is a crisis in higher education in this country, and this crisis is writ large in an academic institution in my own area, the University of East Anglia. And that's why I'm attending this debate today, because the University of East Anglia really matters for our city, it matters for our county, and also it matters for the country. It is a vital hub which delivers cutting-edge research, educates thousands of students, and, of course, provides thousands of jobs. It was also more than just an education facility. It is also on a campus which is home to 5 BBSRC-funded research campuses, 40 businesses, 4 independent research institutes, and a teaching hospital. But a university that has produced renowned novelists, filmmakers, scientists, cardiologists is now in a very precarious position, as are so many other institutions. The proposals put forward by the University of East Anglia could see up to 190 staff members, 163 full-time equivalents losing their jobs, and this comes after losing more than 400 staff a year and a half ago. And this will have a direct impact on many people's lives, of course, but also on our economy. Last week, about 700 university staff members held a strike day to fight against these job cuts. And of course, I understand the pressure that chancellors and vice-chancellors are under, but the loss of knowledge and expertise when staff go lasts for not just years, but it can last for generations to come. So I just want to be clear that I do feel that the jobs and the education of students must be protected at the UEA. I'm sure the Minister will agree that higher education institutes like the UEA are central to both our local and national economy. And as we move towards more devolution in Norfolk and Suffolk, it is deeply worrying that the largest HE provider in our region is in such a difficult position. I've spoken recently with the UCU branch at the UEA, as well as the Vice-Chancellor and members of the team, and I know that there is work to try and find a solution, but it is clear that stress levels are high and morale is low, and of course the impact on staff that go is huge, but also on the staff that are left behind as workloads increase and they see their colleagues go. As we've heard, each individual institution will have its particular issues, but there are systemic issues that need to be addressed. And I think we would all recognise that this is complex. There are many factors at play, but we would also all agree that this has been going on for too long and this has to be gripped. And I do think this government will get to grips with it. We've heard about some of the measures that we could be looking at, of course, looking at how student loans, student payments, tuition fees are structured, but also at some of the shorter-term measures. We heard about looking at caps on student numbers, but also the impact that has come in terms of the visa changes. I also just wanted to make a point about the importance of transparency and accountability for those who lead UK higher education institutions, and I'm talking broadly here, not specifically about UEA, but I think listening to people at UCU, it sometimes feels that staff are not necessarily as fully involved as they should be in some of this decision-making processes. So we do need robust systems of accountability. I also wanted to add a point that when we're talking about higher education funding, we also need to talk about further education funding, and we have very good colleges in Norfolk. We have City College, and I've heard from them that under the previous government, they have felt that they have seemed to be invisible, and I'd urge the Minister, as we look at all of these funding conversations holistically, that we also look at the role of colleges in addressing things like pay parity. And I just wanted to take the opportunity while the Minister is here today to draw her attention to the proposal for an undergraduate dental school at the University of East Anglia. This does touch on funding and jobs. It has cross-party support. It has been in the pipeline for a long time, but in order for courses to start this autumn, we urgently needed an allocation from the Office for Students in terms of places. So I know that a lot is dependent on the spending review, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to highlight this important investment that we need in our area. Thank you.
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Mr Vickers. It's a pleasure to serve under your chair. I just want to start by putting on record my own thanks to higher education. I could not be here today if I hadn't been the first in my family to go to university, and that was possible because the last Labour government set that high ambition for people from poorer backgrounds, and I think this government too can set that high ambition for people to go into FE and into HE. And I think it's also, with your patience, going to be nice for me to thank 2 particular professors. Professor Inderjeet Parmar at the University of Manchester and Professor Duncan Bell at the University of Cambridge, who really, if they hadn't taught me critical thinking and helped to strengthen my sense of independence, I don't know that I would have pursued a career in politics. And I say that particularly because when I speak with professors and teaching staff at the universities in Bournemouth, the town where I am an MP, it is clear that they are passionate about this student experience, they're passionate about education. But the 3 universities are facing danger. We are very fortunate in Bournemouth to have 3 universities. We've got Arts University Bournemouth, teaching 4,000 students, established in 1880. I was pleased to be there just on Saturday as they were hosting a youth celebration showing the ways in which they contribute to our local society. We also have Health Sciences University, who has just installed Her Royal Highness the Princess Anne as its Vice-Chancellor, showing that it's taking a leap forward in providing education, research and clinical care to help build a healthier society. And I commend the leadership of Leslie Haig there. And also Bournemouth University, the largest university in the town, whose motto, "To learn is to change," is one that I feel the teaching staff and the students feel so deeply. I've been honoured to, as my honourable friend for South Ruislip has said, have university election hustings there, to be quizzed by students, to tour their facilities, to meet frequently with their leadership team and to attend their graduation ceremony. And it is a fantastic university. But it is in a difficult position. On the 26th of March, it was announced that teaching and support staff could face up to 200 potential redundancies. It was also announced that there would be a reduction of the number of faculties from 4 to 3, that there would be a suspension of 15 courses, and all of this to address a £15 to £20 million financial black hole that was inherited by the new leadership team, which is moving quickly to try and put the finances right in a very difficult set of circumstances. Constituents of mine have been in touch. I've met with them in surgeries to talk about the possible repercussions for their own livelihoods and for their commitment to their students. They're worried about the possible impact on the education that their students will have. Arts University Bournemouth too is also in a difficult financial position, announcing earlier this year that it could be at risk of particularly job losses, of ongoing financial pressures, having posted a deficit in the last 3 financial years. And I think what this shows is that 2 of the 3 universities in Bournemouth that I've just mentioned are not immune from the challenges that exist nationally. They are in the firing line because we have seen over the last 14 years the funding model for higher education be trashed, and we've seen higher education be so disrespected by the Conservatives. But enough is enough. And what I'm calling on the government to provide to all universities, but in so doing they will benefit the universities in Bournemouth, is that longer-term financial stability, that longer-term financial settlement that can provide not just the security that universities need in order to plan, but also the certainty that their teaching staff need in order to develop their courses, in order to develop the teaching experience and professional development, and to make sure students have the very best possible education. Thank you.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under you today. And I also want to thank my honourable friend, the MP from Bedford, for introducing the debate so well. And I should start by referring members to my register of interests and also saying I'm a member of UCU, and I am proud to say I employ 2 university students in my office on a part-time basis. Our education system in Scotland is crumbling, and it's been allowed to happen. It's becoming all too common to hear from university or college management that course closures are necessary and staff redundancy schemes are unavoidable. So these are not my words, these are the words of Sai Shraddha Vishwanathan, who's the current president of NUS in Scotland, when she's talking about the cuts that universities there face. And Scotland is unique in so many ways, but one of the ways it's unique right now is it stands alone in the world, I think, and having a government that thinks it can grow the economy by cutting university funding and capping the places available to Scottish students, to their own students. And our universities are at a breaking point in Scotland. Funding per undergraduate student in Scotland is over £2,000 less per student compared to England. Think about what that would mean for your universities in England. Undergraduate education in Scotland, universities cannot run it at a profit. It can't even break even. They have to do other things. The cap on places is also brutal. In 2006, since 2006, there's been a 56% increase in the number of applicants to universities, which is fantastic, but there's been an 84% increase in the number refused entry. Watch when clearing comes in the summertime. When options are posted for Scotland's universities, they're often only available from students to outside Scotland. Even when Scottish students have better qualifications, they can't get access to those places because the cap has been used up. The financial crisis is resulting in job losses right across Scotland. We heard about Dundee, that the member for Dundee Central is not in his place just now, but he outlined 700 jobs are at risk there due to a £35 million deficit. The Scottish Government described the bleak outlook in Dundee as troubling. I think the staff there probably view it quite differently. The University of Edinburgh is looking at £140 million worth of cuts over the next 18 months. That's 10% of its annual budget. And the principal there is refused to rule out compulsory redundancies. He says nothing is off the table. In Aberdeen, voluntary redundancy schemes are open. Robert Gordon's talking about losing 100 staff. It's expected the Scottish Funding Council will say, as we've heard earlier, over half the institutions in Scotland are running at a deficit. This is a crisis that demands urgent action. And it's not just universities who are being shortchanged. Poor students are too when it comes to loans for living costs. The living wage went up yesterday, which is good, but a single parent on the national minimum wage in Scotland working 37 hours per week will be earning £3,000 over the threshold for their child having full support at university, meaning that single parent is expected to give the child £1,500 to attend university. This is utterly shameful. I'm a huge supporter of Scottish universities, and I love meeting staff and students in this place to hear about all they do. And often the Honourable Member for Arbroath and Broughty Ferry is there as well, supporting the sector in Scotland, and I do have to acknowledge that. They are at the heart of Scotland's economy and have been for centuries, but they need to be cherished, and that isn't happening right now. We need a Scottish Government that takes the sector seriously. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Maskell.
Thank you, Mr Vickers. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. There is a real mismatch between the Chancellor's growth agenda and the policies impacting higher education funding landscape that we inherited. And this has already been highlighted by looking at every pound of public investment into universities, research, generating £14 in economic output, but scale up, add in the direct, indirect and productivity overspill, and we're talking about £15.2 billion returned to the Exchequer from a £2.49 billion investment. And of course, in the N8 research universities, we have an economic impact greater than the whole of the UK Premier Football League. We know that this is a significant value, and we must honour that value. But if £1 billion is deducted from the UKRI investment, we are talking about a 42% fall in this return. Poor for the economy, poor for the UK industry, and also catastrophic for universities and students. 22,000 jobs could be lost, and this must not happen. And we also must be aware that the demands of the UK industrial ambition far exceeds the supply of graduates that we are currently producing, and we are all alerted to the fall in the role which will hit the higher education sector by 2030. Another 11 million graduates will be needed to be found in order to fuel our economy into the future. And yet last year we saw 5,000 jobs cut in the academic year. There is a real challenge. If we are going to realise the knowledge, scientific, innovative and technical opportunity that this country presents the world, then we must have a global outlook on the investment that we must make into higher education. There have been many factors impounding on universities, and we have heard so many, but particularly around international students. I really do urge the Minister to make representation to the Home Office to ensure that dependents can accompany academics and students as they come to the country, that we have a look again at visa costs and NHS surcharges to enable people to come to our country, to put into our country and bring such benefit, but also that economic benefit, which we know has been so deeply damaging with the changing visa rules. We also must address our relationship with the EU. We got so much out of that relationship. Redress a deeper relationship with Horizon, looking at Erasmus again, and ensuring that we are getting the very best academics and researchers, staff and students from across the EU, and giving our students that opportunity to travel overseas as well, making it more attractive to engage in higher education. The pain has been felt in York. There are 2 universities in my constituency. York St John has removed 70 vacant posts and deleted 30 posts. And the University of York saw 273 already leave. And I know in talking to the unions just last week that the pressure is there once again. And this is having a real impact on staff, on academics, as well as students. We know about the mental health challenges, the stress that people are experiencing, and those workloads, of course, are going up. I'm happy to give way.
You're very kind. Thank you so much for giving way. As an academic in recovery who is currently actually working as a visiting professor at Royal Holloway University on Monday mornings before Parliament sits, what you are saying resonates with me very powerfully. My university at Royal Holloway has announced today a voluntary severance scheme. And I remember back to that moment in 2016 after the Brexit referendum, our international student numbers fell off a cliff. Britain can claim they can't claim to be a genuine world leader in many things, but in our university sector, we absolutely can claim to be a world leader. We have the 2nd largest number of Nobel Prizes of any other country. Does the Honourable Member agree with me? In the words of Joni Mitchell, we won't know what we've lost until it's gone.
I completely do agree with the Honourable Member and thank him for participating in this debate and bringing his experience to. There was a referendum 9 years ago and the country was in a very different place then, and I think we've got to address that, but also look at the opportunity that gives to put funding into the sector. It's very clear at the moment that the funding model is broken. We know that students can't continue to pay higher tuition fees, and nor should they. The funding model needs to shift, and I personally support a progressive taxation system because whether you earn more money because you're a graduate or through other means, I do believe the more you earn, the more you should put into the system and to have that benefit. Because I know in York, where the cost of living is exceedingly high, students are breaking. They're working more hours than they are studying, and as a result some people are not even able to complete their courses. That is not the kind of education system that we should be supporting, and therefore I do believe that we've got to revisit the whole funding model. Tweaking around the edges is not the time, is not for this time. But I do want to, in my closing remarks, say that we're missing the opportunity of the economic future of our country. In York, the bioeconomy, the digital and advanced rail opportunities, the safer automation and the digital creative sector need these graduates, need these academics, and we need our universities to remain.
Peter Prinsley.
Thank you, Mr Vickers. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. So I'd like to speak this afternoon about the vital but vulnerable role of clinical academics. These are the people who combine frontline work in the hospitals with teaching and research at the universities. They are essential to the success of life sciences and are central to the training of the future NHS workforce. Now, clinical academics are employed by the NHS and higher education institutions jointly. Their pay follows the NHS consultant contract, which was updated last year after national negotiations. However, universities were not part of these negotiations and are now required to implement this contract without having received any additional funding. So the result is a deeply worrying one. I understand that 20 out of 26 medical schools may be preparing to offer redundancy to clinical academics because they simply cannot afford them. Now, that would be a disaster. We cannot afford to lose the very people who train the future NHS staff, who carry out the medical research, which underpins all of the innovation in our health service. So as the government rightly expands the number of medical school places, we'll depend even more on the clinical academics to educate the next generation of doctors, and their numbers are declining. Clinical academics now make up just 5.7% of the consultant workforce, down from 8.6% in 2011. Over the last decade or so, we've seen a 6% fall in medically qualified researchers and a 24% decline at the senior lecturer level. So we're marching towards a cliff edge. More than a third of clinical academics are over the age of 55 and are approaching retirement. So universities need to provide incentives to get younger clinical academics to come. We did solve this problem previously. When the consultant contract changed in 2003, the then Department of Health provided £15 million to support the medical schools with the implementation of the consultant clinical academic contract. That funding was later embedded in the baseline grants to the universities. That would be a model for solving this problem. Unless we act now, we will lose this vital workforce altogether at the very moment when we need them most, and we simply won't be able to run our medical schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vickers. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend for bringing this important debate. In my constituency, Bournemouth West, we are fortunate to have two world-class universities producing the next generation of entrepreneurs, creative industries leaders and journalists. The universities are a cornerstone of our communities and play a hugely important role in our local economy. But as we've heard from many honourable members across the House today, higher education is in crisis. Our education system is struggling to cope with the many years of chronic mismanagement under the Conservatives. Student numbers have suffered from a combination of visa changes, Brexit, and the impact of rising cost of living. These have affected students' decisions on whether and where to study in the UK. And it has left universities across the country facing difficult decisions about what they continue to offer. Now, my honourable friend from Bournemouth East has rather stolen my thunder by talking about the two universities in my constituency, Bournemouth University and Arts University Bournemouth. So as you have all heard, the challenges are great, and it is not simply limited to Bournemouth University, these issues that are facing the higher education system. I too have heard from numerous staff members and students who are worried about the impacts that cuts will have for them and will mean for them. Many have moved and made their lives in Bournemouth because of the opportunities offered to them by Bournemouth University, and I've also met local university leaders to discuss these issues with them, and I hope to do so again as they during their consultation period, which I encourage and hope that all staff do engage with. I'm pleased that the government has demonstrated a commitment to supporting the higher education system, and I know ministers are acutely aware of these challenges, and I appreciate the steps that have been taken. But can I now ask the Minister, given just how important our higher education system is for our standing in the world, creating the vital soft power links that we need with nations and individuals around the world, what assessment has she made of the impact of visa changes on international students and university finances? I also want to welcome the government's mission to break down barriers to opportunities and provide young people with the right pathways that are suitable for them after secondary school. So given it's clear that there is a crisis in funding, what assessment has she made of the stability of this fees-based model and the sustainability of it? And what steps is she taking to ensure that young people across the country can access good quality and affordable higher education should they wish to? Finally, I'd like to turn back to Bournemouth. Specifically, Minister, can you reassure students and staff at Bournemouth University that the government is aware of the proposals being made there and will work with local partners to help address the issue? And would the Minister be willing to meet with me and the other Dorset MPs who represent many amazing universities to discuss this situation in greater detail? To the students and staff at Bournemouth University, I want to reassure you that I will continue to press for the support you need during this difficult time, and I will work closely with the university, the local community, the UCU and my colleagues in Parliament to ensure that your concerns are heard and that we begin to tackle the gravity of this situation.
James Naish.
Thank you, Mr Vickers. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I congratulate my honourable friend for Bedford for securing this important debate today. And I do note with a little bit of sadness that the previous government, which presided over the system, is barely here. The impact of university finances on jobs in higher education is one that is felt deeply in my constituency of Rushcliffe, which is not only home to a University of Nottingham campus, but it sits in the middle of a fantastic cluster of East Midlands universities: the University of Nottingham, Nottingham Trent University, the University of Derby, Loughborough University, the University of Leicester and De Montfort University. These universities are all vital to our local economy and also play a major role in producing spin-out businesses, which in turn create high-quality jobs for local people.
However, as has been admirably described by many honourable members today, the pressure of the funding crisis in higher education is already being felt locally. In 2024, Nottingham Trent University removed over 230 staff members in a cost-cutting drive. The University of Nottingham too has faced a highly challenging year, reporting a £17 million loss. These are not isolated events. They are part of a sector-wide crisis. The University and College Union has warned that over 5,000 jobs are already marked for cuts this year, and if current trends continue, more than 5,000 additional posts could follow. That equates to thousands of lecturers, researchers and support staff, many of whom are already working under precarious contracts, now facing uncertainty or redundancy. But the consequences of this crisis extend far beyond employment. When institutions are forced to shrink their workforce, course offerings are reduced, class sizes rise, and students, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, lose access to the quality education that they deserve. The knock-on effects on research output, regional economies, and especially the UK's global reputation for higher education are significant. Now, we know that university finances are being squeezed on multiple fronts: declining numbers of international students, increased costs associated with inflation and pension liabilities, and flatlining income from domestic tuition fees. For many institutions, especially those without large endowments or global brand recognition, the financial model is simply no longer sustainable. Mr Vickers, we therefore need a serious review of the governance structures across the sector, and I'd like to ask the Minister to explain what the government is planning to do in this regard. If some institutions are being forced into short-term reactive cuts while others remain relatively stable, we must ask why. Are decisions being made transparently? Are senior management teams being held to account for financial planning? How can we ensure that long-term educational quality is prioritised over short-term balance sheets? Mr Vickers, today's debate isn't simply about special treatment for one sector. It's about recognising that higher education is a national asset. Universities drive innovation, anchor regional economies, and provide opportunities to millions. If we allow them to hollow out their workforces, we risk eroding the very foundation on which they stand. I know many members across the House have universities in their constituencies facing similar pressures, and I hope that today's debate serves as a call to action, not just to acknowledge the funding crisis in the higher education sector, but to begin charting a new, sustainable path for its future.
If the front benches could limit their contribution to 9 minutes, we'll just have time for Mr Yazin to sum up. Ian Solomon for the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr Vickers. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. And I would like to thank the Honourable Member for Bradford for securing the debate today and raising this important issue. Bedford, did I say Bedford? Oh, sorry, I said Bradford. I should know, you're a near neighbour of mine, which was just what I was going to say. I was just, because while I am here as Lib Dem spokesperson for higher education today, the proximity of St Neots to Bedford does give me a particular constituency interest in the concerns that he raises on the particular challenges facing the University of Bedfordshire, and we've heard how they're echoed across the country, listening to honourable members around the hall today. It is clear that many universities are feeling huge financial pressure, and this is something we're all concerned about. University financial challenges are not just numbers on a spreadsheet, as we've heard. They affect real people, their livelihoods, and the quality of education and research, as well as their communities. Mr Vickers, I'm not as young as I used to be, but so I hope I'm valid in saying now, saying I can't remember a time where universities have faced such financial pressures, and we desperately need this not to continue. The amount of income English universities receive for teaching UK students has declined in real terms almost every year since 2015-2016 and is now approaching the lowest level since 1997. And there are major budget shortfalls due to rising costs in areas like the energy costs and, more recently, national insurance contributions, as well as a lack of investment and support after years of, frankly, neglect from the last Conservative government. And that's coupled with, as many members have mentioned today, a decline in international student numbers due to visa restrictions, and those points have been well made. We are in a global competition in that regard, and it's unsurprising that our institutions have ended up in such a fragile financial position. Figures released by the Office for Students in November revealed that 40% of education providers were already forecasting deficits. But I believe new data suggests that up to 72% of providers could be in deficit by the 25-26 academic year without any mitigating action from the government. So it's unsurprising that many institutions will be forced to make difficult decisions and are being forced to make difficult decisions on staffing across all jobs in the sector, including not just academic staff, but support workers. Mr. Vickers, this is deeply worrying and will see the sector and the country more widely negatively impacted. We know that universities play a crucial role in our country, providing a high-quality education to many, research and development, and crucially boosting regional economies. Many universities are the largest employers in their area, and the knock-on economic benefits of students living in those areas can't be overemphasised. The bottom line is that higher education is an investment in our future on many levels. When it comes to research and development activities, our universities are world-leading and at the forefront of discoveries and innovations that boost growth and improve everyday lives. The members for Colchester and for York Central mentioned that for every £1 invested in university research and innovation, the UK gets £14 back. I had a slightly more conservative figure, dare I say, of £10, but the order of magnitude is absolutely clear, and it's quite reassuring that there are different research out there that reinforces those kinds of numbers. And on top of that, universities are vital in supporting startup companies across the country. Universities UK has recently launched its Unis Startup the UK campaign. And they say that this partnering with startups boosts economic growth by creating jobs and attracting investment, and sees universities equipping entrepreneurs with the right skills through incubator hubs. Analysis by the Higher Education Statistics Agency shows that between 2014-2015 and 2022-23, there was a 70% increase in the number of startups founded in UK universities, and that in 2022-23, around 64,000 people were employed by those startups. That's up 170% in that time. It's from 2014 to 15. And that report predicts that with the right support, by 2028, 27,000 new startups could be established by students and staff at UK universities, with a predicted turnover of around 10.8 billion. But despite the clear positive contributions that universities make to social and economic life, in far too many cases, their current finances are simply unsustainable. In the last year, around 3/4 of universities have implemented significant savings programmes, including redundancies, sadly, course closures, reduction in module options and consolidation of professional services and student support. Thriving universities are essential to a thriving UK, delivering stronger growth, better public services and improving individual life chances. If the government is serious about its growth mission, then it has to work with the higher education sector to stabilise funding, protect fair pay and jobs, and ensure long-term sustainability. So we've been calling on the government to implement a full-scale review of higher education finance and believe there are many more things that can be done to support universities that don't involve raising student tuition fees further. Recognising the benefits that international students bring and giving universities stability in those policies, and reversing the decline in quality-related funding for research. And finally, the government should clearly be working with the sector to put those clear plans in place for any university that finds itself in financial distress. We really don't want to lose any university in the higher education sector. Thank you, Mr. Vickers.
Shadow Minister Rebecca Paul.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr. Vickers, and I am grateful to all colleagues who have contributed today to this important debate. I also want to thank the Honourable Member for Bedford for securing today's debate, which could not be more timely. Our universities are among the most important institutions in our national life. They are centres of research, innovation and learning, and for many thousands of young people every year, they are the route to opportunity, economic independence and personal growth. Despite its great importance, the higher education sector has come under increasing pressure in recent years, with the Office for Students' latest modelling suggesting that nearly 3/4 of English higher education providers could be in deficit by 2025-2026, and 40% would have fewer than 30 days liquidity. Indeed, at some institutions, redundancy programmes are already underway, as we have heard today from many of the contributions, and across the country. University staff are understandably anxious about the future. Let me say at the outset, I am deeply sympathetic to those who work in institutions that have found themselves in financial difficulty. Nevertheless, I do believe that it's now past time for us to look and have a grown-up conversation about university finances, one in which we look seriously at what is driving these pressures and what it might be possible to do to alleviate them. I will begin by stating the obvious. Decisions taken in recent years have increased the financial pressure on students and graduates without necessarily addressing deeper questions of value and sustainability. We have seen a steady rise in both student loan interest rates and tuition fees, both falling heavily on students. And then now a spike in employer national insurance contributions, putting further cost pressures on universities. Meanwhile, the government's proposals to cut funding for Level 7 apprenticeships, qualifications that are essential in a number of fields, including education, health and engineering, risk further undermining key parts of the post-18 education ecosystem. Many university departments rely on that funding, not just to sustain course provision, but to attract and retain highly qualified staff. The impact of those cuts will not be evenly spread, and it is right that we consider how they will affect institutions already under financial pressure. That said, I will of course give way.
Thanks, Minister, for giving way. Would she take some responsibility on behalf of her party for the situation that many universities find themselves in?
I thank the Honourable Member for her contribution. I would suggest to the Honourable Member that we need to look at the situation that we have, and her questions should be targeted to the Minister today, because what we should deal with is the situation we have now and make the right decisions in order that we do the right thing for our country, for our students, for our university staff. So that said, we must also confront an uncomfortable truth. There is now mounting evidence, including from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, indicating that a sizable share of higher education courses simply do not provide good value for money, either for the taxpayer or for the individual student. The IFS has concluded that around 30% of graduates, both men and women, would have been better off financially had they not gone to university at all. This raises important questions as to how we ensure our higher education system delivers for those who fund it,
namely the students who invest years of their lives and take on significant debt, and the public whose taxes support the student loan system. The current funding model is failing under the enormous weight of rapid expansion, marketisation and insufficient quality controls. The ability for an institution to prop itself up on the backs of overseas students paying vast fees is coming to an end. While fee income from international students has grown by an average of 15% a year between 2017 and 2023, the recent international recruitment environment has been very challenging, and recent Home Office data indicates that there were 393,125 visas issued to main applicants in 2024, which is down 13.9% year on year and down 18.8% compared with 2 years ago. While some institutions have embraced innovation, strong outcomes and world-class research, others have pursued growth at all costs, adding courses with limited market value, often to attract overseas students or to maximise short-term income. We cannot and should not return to a time when university was only accessible to a wealthy minority. But we do need to have a serious conversation about what the purpose of higher education is, who it is for, and how it can be sustainably funded in a way that delivers for students, taxpayers, and the wider economy. That means looking at systemic reform rather than simply demanding young people pay more without addressing those underlying issues. We need to examine course quality, graduate outcomes, student choice, and the role of further education and apprenticeships alongside traditional degrees. Such a reform could begin by addressing I will in a moment. Such reform could begin by addressing the unacceptable lack of transparency around the student loan system. The public has a right to know how the system is operating, who is borrowing, who is repaying, and where there may be a risk of fraud or misuse. I understand that a paper on this very subject, compiled by the IFS and commissioned by the last government, remains unpublished, despite efforts to obtain it via Freedom of Information requests. I hope the Minister might be able to explain why this is the case and will understand that transparency builds trust while withholding data only fuels suspicion. On a related theme, questions have rightly been asked about the eligibility criteria for student loans, particularly for non-UK nationals and EU citizens with settled status. It is, I think, surprising to many that even several years after Brexit, over 180,000 individuals were granted settled status in the first 6 months of this government. That figure deserves scrutiny, and it is legitimate to query what the implications will be for access to taxpayer-funded support in accessing higher education. It has been widely reported that the Student Loans Company is now accepting a mere certificate of application for settled status in order to approve loans. If that is the case, then I would urge ministers to review that policy as a matter of urgency. We must ensure that eligibility checks are robust and that the system is not open to exploitation. I'm going to continue just in terms of time. Coming now to concerns over the quality of some higher education provision. The government has said it is considering changes to the regulation of franchise providers, some of which have been implicated in cases of poor quality provision and potential fraud. While I welcome the consultation launched by the Department for Education, I would caution that many of the largest franchise providers are already regulated by the Office for Students. So the key question is not simply whether they are regulated, but how well the regulatory framework is working and whether it is actually driving up standards. And finally, we have heard ministers speak in recent months about tweaking the role of the Office for Students to strengthen its focus on value for money. In October, the department said it was developing options for legislative change, and the Secretary of State has since re-announced that commitment. But as far as I can tell, no tangible progress has been made. When will we actually see legislation brought forward? We have also heard mention of the Public Sector Fraud Authority being brought in, but that too sounds remarkably similar to the Internal Audit Agency investigation mentioned in last year's National Audit Office report. What is changing exactly, or are we simply hearing the same announcement wrote in new language? I will now conclude by emphasising that the largest losses to the taxpayer do not always come from outright criminal fraud, but from legally operating institutions that provide poor value. These providers operate within the letter of the law, but not in its spirit. They enrol students on low-value courses with high dropout rates and weak earning potentials, while drawing down large sums from the student loan system, sums which in many cases will never be repaid. We cannot continue like this. Our goal should be a higher education system that is sustainable, high quality and genuinely life-changing. I look forward to continuing this discussion in the months ahead. Thank you.
Minister Janet Davey.
Thank you, Mr Vickers, and it's a pleasure to speak under your chairmanship. And I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Bedford, on securing a debate on this important subject. I know he has a keen interest in financial sustainability of the higher education sector, and I've heard from him and from many members from across this chamber speaking about their amazing universities in their constituencies, and I've welcomed all of their contributions. I've heard about universities' contributions to economic growth, about systemic issues, operational expenses, student numbers from both home and overseas, redundancies of staff, deficits being carried by universities, and many, many other issues. I acknowledge and I've heard these concerns, and I will address in my response, I will be speaking on higher education employment, financial position of higher education, the role of the Office for Students in the time that I have, tuition fees increase, the risk of financial failure, independence of the sector, higher education workforce, higher education reform, international students, research funding and employer national insurance contributions, as well as the franchising fraud that the honourable member for Reigate has mentioned. So I therefore wish to begin just by thanking all of the members again that have spoken. Honourable member for North East 5, Hayes and Harlington, Dundee Central, Strangford, Colchester, Arbroath and Broughton Ferry, Edinburgh South West, Uxbridge and South Ruislip, Ceredigion, Presili, Norwich North, Bournemouth East, Edinburgh South West, York Central, Surrey Heath, Bury St Edmunds, and as I just paused there, in response to my honourable friend Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket, I would like to respond by saying the government recognises the vital role that clinical academics play in research and education in the NHS. And while universities are independent, they are therefore responsible for decisions around pay, and we are committed to working closely with partners in education to ensure clinical academia remains an attractive career choice. I'd also like to thank the member for Bournemouth West, as well as her invitation to visit the Dorset. Have I got that wrong now? Yes, the Dorset. No. Is that right? Thank you so much. The Dorset MPs, and I will pass that on to my noble friend who's in the other place, the Minister for Skills, Higher Education and Further Education. Also want to thank the member for Rushcliffe, St Notes in Mid-Cambridgeshire, and obviously the honourable member for Reigate. So, as I set out in a similar debate on this topic, indeed in December, the government values the vital contribution that a world-leading sector makes to the United Kingdom. Through education provision and research output, our providers are integral to our economy, to industry and innovation, and to wider society. The sector contributes to productivity and growth and plays a crucial civic role in local communities, and also helps enhance the UK's global reputation. And of course, higher education providers are vital employers in their local communities and across England as a whole. They provide jobs not only for academic staff such as professors and researchers, but also for a wide range of non-academic roles in administration, facilities management, IT, student support services and many more. This government recognises that the financial position of the sector is indeed under pressure. In November, the Office for Students published an update to their May report on the financial health of the sector. The update states the financial context for the sector has become more challenging since the May report. By 2025-26, the Office for Students predicts that incomes will be 3.4 billion lower than provider forecasts, and up to 72% of providers could be in deficit if they do not take significant mitigating action. And we've already heard about much of this already across the Chamber. It is therefore clear that our higher education providers need a secure financial footing to face the challenges of the next decade. And I want to assure members that we are committed to working in partnership with the sector to put our providers on a firmer financial footing than that which we have inherited. And as it has already been mentioned, that there are absolutely no speakers from Her Majesty's opposition to speak on this important issue, and that indeed will send a message to universities in terms of them being valued or not. Indeed, this government has acted quickly to address these challenges. Last month, Professor Edward Peck was appointed as substantive chair of the Office of Students. Professor Peck will continue the excellent work of interim chair, and Sir David Behan focusing on the sector's financial sustainability and increasing opportunities in higher education. In recognition of the pressures facing the sector in December, the Office for Students announced temporary changes to its operations to allow greater focus on financial sustainability. It will work more closely with providers under significant financial pressure in order to protect the interests of students. And of course, the government has announced that tuition fee limits will increase in line with inflation. And as a result, the maximum fee for a standard full-time undergraduate course in 2025-26 academic year will increase by 3.1%. From 9,250 to 9,535 for a standard full-time course, and from 11,100 to 11,440 for a full-time accelerated course, and from 6,935 to 7,145 for a part-time course. This was not an easy decision, but it was the right decision to put our higher education sector on a more secure financial footing. In return for the increased investment that we are asking students to make, we expect our providers to deliver the very best outcomes for both students and for the country. I also want to make clear this government's position. I want to affirm that all providers, regardless of their current position, must continue to adapt to uncertainties and financial risk. And while the Office for Students has statutory duties in relation to financial sustainability of the higher education sector, the government has a clear interest in understanding the sector's level of risk. As well as the Office of Students, my department continues to work closely with on the higher education representative groups such as Universities UK and other government departments such as Department for Science, Innovation and Technology in order to better understand the sector's changing financial landscape. I also want to make clear this government's position on providers at risk of financial failure. If a provider was at risk of unplanned closure, or indeed found itself in the process of exiting the sector, my department would work with the Office for Students, the provider and other government departments to ensure students' best interests were protected, and students will always be our priority, but also to support the university as best as possible. I want to commend the dedication of staff across the sector during these difficult times. Their hard work and commitment continue to uphold the quality and reputation of our higher education providers, and there are undeniably challenging times, and we understand that some providers have had to make difficult decisions around staffing to safeguard their financial sustainability. As independent institution providers, they are responsible for managing their budgets, including decisions about pay and staffing, and this government does not intervene in these matters or in disputes between providers and their staff. However, we expect providers to engage constructively with their workforce to identify ways to reduce unnecessary expenditure while ensuring sustainability. Long-term benefits for both students and the sector as a whole. Looking ahead, ministers and officials remain committed to maintaining strong collaborative relationships with employers, staff and unions through continued dialogue. We aim to better understand the challenges facing the sector and provide support for its evolving needs. Due to time, Chair, it feels like I need to press on. But just to say, this government is committed to working with universities.
Yasin, to wind up.
Mr. Vickers, it's been an honour to both open and close this very important debate. I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to everyone who participated and made a compelling case for the future of our higher education sector. It's clear that we all share a deep pride in our world-class universities and the exceptional staff who dedicate their lives to educating and shaping the workforce of tomorrow. However, we must recognise that words alone are not going to be enough. We must take meaningful action to ensure that our university remains sustainable and fit for the future without compromising the invaluable knowledge base or limiting student choice. I would like to thank the Minister and Shadow Minister for their contribution today, and I look forward for the forthcoming Education Select Committee session on this matter next Tuesday. Together, I hope we can rise to the challenge and collaborate to ensure that our universities continue to provide and transformative.
The question is that this House has considered the impact of university finances on jobs in higher education. And many of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
Thank you. Well done.
Okay, well done.
Order. Order. I will call